Welcome to episode 7 of the 10 and 2 Medita tutorial. This time we're going to look at volume triggers, pad triggers, Teethspikes, sub-click geometry, climbable pushables, Flipmaps, needing more than one key or item to trigger something, and how to create see-through but solid walls or floors. Underneath the trapdoor in the room that we created at the end of last lesson, we want to add a new room, another portal. It's a bit hard to access, so I'm going to uncheck draw movables because movables are objects that either move or Lara can interact with, and that includes a trapdoor. Drag down the room quite a bit so you've got a vertical shaft. Looking at the bottom then, the floor is at 1, ceiling is at 21, so it's about 20 clicks tall. I'm just going to resize the room slightly. I'm going to rotate it just for better orientation, and that way the front of the room is also the front in the 2D map. So I want to add 3 blocks to the back. I'm going to drag down the ceiling. Here it's 7 clicks. It doesn't matter exactly, but that's roughly what it is. And I'm going to apply a couple of climbable walls. We want Lara to climb all the way down here, but I'm going to put some Teethspikes at the bottom so she can't touch the floor. And instead, once she gets down here, she needs to climb to the right and then climb down here. So we need to make both of these climbable. Select the floor tiles in front, have a look at the 2D map, and the walls we want to make climbable are on the eastern side. So using these symbols, click this one, climb on east sector side, the walls go pink. In the 2D map, you notice the pink line. On this bit of wall, it will also apply to the one above it. If we just go into that room, it will then automatically be applied. I want a music track to be played as Lara is climbing down the wall, but I don't want it to be played all the way at the top, only about halfway down. Problem with classic triggers is that they always go from the floor all the way to the ceiling. So if I triggered a music track that way, even when she's in this top room, and she jumps over the trapdoor, she would actually trigger the music track. And this is where we want to use a volume trigger. You could go up to items and then add box volume and click the square. You could add a sphere volume, which is the same thing except that it's a different shape. You could hold down Alt and V and then click. I actually want to add a couple of symbols to this toolbar just to make it quicker than going to the menu. So right-click on the toolbar and click Customize. On the right are the buttons that we've already got in the toolbar, and on the left are ones that we could add. You'll see that Add Box Volume and Add Sphere Volume are there. So I'm going to add both of them to that list. By default, they'll be added to the front, but I'm going to move them down to the end. So they're now at the end of the list. Click Apply and OK, and you'll notice them there. So do that with the box volume and then raise this up to about 2/3 of the way up this room. So volume triggers and the node editor are the heart of creating events, and you can make some really complex customized events. This not only includes making a trigger in only a small area, but also with nodes includes moving objects, visual effects, setting up complex puzzles, and creating conditional events. For example, if X is true, then Y will happen. It's worth checking out what nodes there are so you can see what's possible. The nodes are also a way to avoid scripting events with Lua if you don't want to do scripting. Almost everything that you can do with a classic trigger, you can also do with a volume trigger. Some triggers are still easier with classic triggers like puzzle holes and keyholes. For this, double-click on the middle of the volume and it will open up this screen, and this is the node editor. With a volume trigger, what we need to do is create an event. Let's click plus above event sets to add a new one and give it a name. I'm going to call it play music. This grid on the right is the node editor, and we want to add a node to play the music. Right click and it will give you box with a search bar. Here you've got all the possible nodes. If you go down to sound, then you will find play audio track. But you could just type audio into the box and it will also find it. Double click this. We want to select the number of audio track we want to play. Let's select 58. On the right, you've got a few options. One shot, which basically means it only plays once. You could play it looped, and that's used for background audio, the ambience. There's also a third track, which we wanted to add some dialogue. For us, we're just going to use the one shot. On the right-hand side, you've got 3 options: on volume enter, inside, and leave. So you can set them up that it triggers as soon as Lara touches the volume. Inside means it will trigger for the entire time that Lara's inside, or you can have it when she leaves a volume. Here it makes sense for just when she enters it. At the bottom right, you've got call count. This is how many times the trigger can be triggered, and you can set that to whatever you like. We're going to set it to 1 because we only want the music to play once. So it's a bit like a one-shot trigger from earlier. At the bottom here, you can tick who will actually trigger it. Lara, NPC, which is enemies, other objects, and this is a bit like a heavy trigger from earlier, like a rolling ball. Statics means that if you have a static within the volume and then shatter it, it will trigger something, and then a flyby camera. For us, we just want Lara. Just check that enable volume is ticked, and detect in adjacent rooms. This is only needed if your volume trigger goes across 2 rooms. So click OK. And now the trigger's ready. Let's add some teeth spikes. Go to the object menu, type in teeth, and add them to this square. I can't see them because I've forgotten to tick draw movables. Teeth spikes need to be triggered, and their default behavior is to shoot out at the bottom of the floor. You can rotate them freely if you want to. That will still work. And you can also add an OCB code to change the behavior. For example, if you want them to come in and out constantly, what we want is just the default behavior, which is whenever Lara triggers them, they just stay out and kill her. We want to make it so they're not just coming out of a solid floor, and there is an object to do that. If you go down to the statics and choose static 28, add it to the floor, it should automatically be in the right place. So we want to trigger these teeth spikes. If we added a classic normal trigger on the square, they will trigger whenever Lara jumps across the trapdoor up here. We don't want that. We only want them to trigger if Lara touches the ground. We could create a volume trigger. We could make it quite small. I'm going to show you another type of classic trigger though here, and that's called a pad trigger. So add a trigger to the square, and in the trigger type, select pad and one shot. Pad means that it will only trigger whenever Lara literally touches the floor. Let's create another room, and so the end of this one, draw a portal, and I'm going to make it 9 blocks long. I'm going to turn around the screen so it's easier to see, so we resize it the right way, and I'm going to increase the dimensions 6 to the left and 4 to the right. About 3 blocks in from the door we've created, I'm going to select these 9 squares. Making sure we have drag selected, I'm going to bring them down by 3 clicks. And I've decided I want a bit of this room to look less blocky than normal. I don't want every single step to have to be a whole click that size. This is where we can use sub-click geometry, and this is where the step height at the bottom right is really important. By default, 1 click is 256 units, but you can actually make them even smaller. If you try it out, select one side, and you'll notice that each time it goes down by half a click. You can even do 1/4 or 1/8. So you can really change exactly how the room looks. You're not totally stuck to the 1-click sizes. Just play around with the floor here. Make sure that the 9 squares in the center remain flat at that height, but the rest I'm going to bring down just so that the steps aren't all just 1 click high. From the center of this square, count 4 blocks to the left, and I want to lower this block down to the same level as this here. We know that this is the lowest point of the room, and if we look at the bottom, it says floor -2. So we want to bring this square also down to -2. Looking at the Y value, it's currently at 0.25. So I just need to do what I need to do to bring it down to -2, and it's at the same level. The reason is we're going to add another room underneath, and we want to connect it with 2 portals. And to do that, they have to be at the same height. I'm going to change the step height back to 256, as using smaller step heights can make it a little trickier to make sure that everything lines up. Select the 9 squares in the middle, and let's add a new room underneath. We can leave it at about 4 clicks high, but we want to change the size of it so that it extends up to this bit of the floor. And we can connect a portal to this room. You can either do it from the room below by clicking this square and then the portal button, or you can do it the other way around from the room at the top. In the room at the bottom, create walls here to create a little corridor. And what we're going to do is we're going to add the second half of the puzzle piece that we found earlier, so Lara can then combine the two and open a door. So let's put that in the middle. Go to the objects list, type in puzzle, and in the drop-down menu, select puzzle item combo 2. But we don't want her to just jump in and collect it. But we also want her to see it, just so it serves as a kind of teaser to tempt her in. And so the player can also see what the ultimate goal is. So we're going to create a grated floor. So it's a floor that's solid, but is also partly transparent so that you can see through. So in the room at the bottom, select the portal with the right mouse button and click this one here, which is textured and solid, toggle opacity 1. Remember, we used toggle opacity 2 for water. Now we want 1. If we have a look from below, we can see it. Do the same thing with the portal from the ceiling. Right click on it and click toggle opacity 1. And then go into face edit mode and let's texture that before we forget. This texture is a grate. You can either just add it to the floor and then go into the room below and also add it to the ceiling. Or you could do the same trick that we did with the water, which is to add it onto one side, but with double-sided attributed, and then texture the ceiling of the room underneath as transparent. Back in geometry mode, in the room below, we also don't want Lara to be able to access this room immediately. We're going to block it off. And for this, we're going to use the other raising block. So if you type in raising and add raising block 1, we then want Lara to solve a puzzle to lower this, and then she can come in and collect the object. You might remember from the previous raising block, when you trigger the raising block, it actually goes up. But what if I want it to go the other way round? Well, you could trigger the raising block somewhere else so it goes up, and then anti-trigger it so that it goes down when she solves the puzzle. Another option is if you select the raising block, click O, and then tick all of these bits 1 to 5. This has the same effect of automatically triggering. So whenever the level begins, it will be triggered. What this then means is if you then trigger the raising block later on, it actually acts as the opposite, as an anti-trigger. And that can be quite useful if you're creating some complex stacked triggers. More about that later when we put the trigger, but for now, make sure all of these are ticked and click OK. So for her to solve this puzzle and lower the raising block, she's going to have to collect 2 different objects and then use them both on some pedestals. Let's add those pedestals, and I want to add them here at these corners. I'm going to create a wall next to them so that they're in a little bit of an alcove. And then if you type in puzzle, go down to puzzle hole 2, and then add one here and there. Puzzle hole, normally you can only activate it from one side. So even though it's in the middle, you can only activate it from this side, the plane side. So make sure that this bit without an image is facing outwards. So Lara will place the 2 objects on these, and then it will lower the raising block. We'll place the triggers later though. I want to create a jumping platforming puzzle, and she's going to go up into another room, and then she'll collect one of the jars that she needs to put on the pedestal. We want to create a couple of ledges. One way to do it is that we can just lower the ceiling from this room first and then add a portal. And I don't want the ledge to be 1 click thick. I want it to be a bit thinner, about half the size. I'm changing the step height to 128. Select these 5 long and 1 down and just pull it down. Leave the 3 in the middle and pull these down also by the same amount. I'm going to create a new room above. The easiest way is just to select all of the ceiling using the 2D map and then dig a room. I'm raising it to about 8 clicks high. The exact height doesn't matter too much. Extend these columns by adding a wall. And you can see better how our ledges look a little bit thinner, but they'll still work as normal. So Lara's going to need to jump on some blocks up to here, run across, and then she can get the object on this side. Reset the step height to 256. Near the back wall, about 3 blocks from the edge of this ledge, select the floor and bring it up by about 4 clicks. I want to create a slope on top that Lara can't stand on, she'll slide down. So click on top and then keep clicking until the arrow is facing the wall. Pull it up. And this is a 3-click slope, which is too much for Lara. 2 blocks in front. I'm going to create a whole wall because I want it to go from floor to ceiling. I want to make it so that the player has to jump on this first and then onto this. So going into the top room, let's just raise this by a couple of clicks. And then from here, she can run and jump. For that, we'll probably need to raise the ceiling, otherwise she might hit it, but we'll come to that later. There's a nice icon at the top, which can tell you if a slope is something where Lara's going to slide down. It's called Draw Slide Directions. Click on it, and any slope that's slidable will be purple. And it will also show you arrows, which indicate which direction. So here it's going to be downwards. At the top in this corner, I'm just going to raise this a little bit. I want it to be about half a click in height. And on top of it, I'm going to put one of the puzzle items she needs. And in this case, it's going to be puzzle item 2. So these two ledges we've created, we don't want Lara to just be able to jump up and grab them. And so they need to be at least 8 clicks high. Mine are actually 7. I could just pull up the floor on top of these, but then I don't have the thin ledges that I wanted. So I'm just going to actually lower the floor around it. Once she picks up the puzzle piece, I want to trigger a mummy coming out of a room. We're going to need a door, so we're going to have to create a new room. Select the wall and portal and create a room that's 2 clicks long. Place door type 4 on the portal. It's a bit high, so I'm going to make sure that I raise the ceilings of both rooms. Behind this door, add a mummy. Type in mummy into the objects menu. Going to make sure it's facing the right way. And then just for an incentive for Lara to actually have to tackle the mummy in some way, I'm going to put gun behind the mummy. For this one, let's put the revolver. We want to trigger the door whenever she picks up the object. And if you remember from earlier, we need a special pickup trigger for this. Click on the square and the puzzle piece. Add a trigger. Change it to pickup. And then making sure that the object is highlighted, click O and add 64, because the OCB of 64 activates a pickup trigger. And then add a trigger for the door onto the same square. We also need to add the trigger for the mummy. So it's a very simple platforming puzzle, but it's one half of our puzzle for this area. For the other half, we're going to use another classic feature of Tomb Raider levels, and that's the flip map. A flip map is whenever you want to change something about the room. The classic one is from a dry room to a water room, or the other way around, but you could also change the colors, the objects, or the general geometry. Maybe there's been an earthquake, and it changes how Lara can jump around the room. For us, we're going to go with the classic dry room to water room. I have changed the floor to kind of create a sort of step effect. It doesn't matter exactly where it is on the wall, but somewhere. Create a new room. And in total, I want to make it 10 blocks long. And then add 1 to either side, so that it's 10 clicks long, 3 clicks down. We want to avoid the classic wafer-thin wall, so create walls next to it. How this puzzle is going to work, we're going to be using a climbable pushable. Lara needs to go up to the pushable, push it off the ledge, push it then a little bit further until she can reach a jump switch. And then when she uses the jump switch, the room at the bottom will turn into water and she can swim to the other side to collect the second puzzle piece. In this room, select all of the floor tiles apart from the lines at the edge, making sure that my step height is full, and lower it by 1 click just to create a ledge, because underneath will be the water room eventually. Let's create a new room underneath and lower it by at least 8 clicks, because we don't want Lara to just jump down into the dry room and then jump up the other side. She needs the water in order to swim across. Going back into the room above, I'm going to create another ledge, and I'm also going to create it about half a click in size. So I've selected 128 step height. And for this, select 3 squares on the ceiling, not including one over this ledge, because we want Lara to push something off, which will then land there. And I'm going to pull it down by 1. We don't want Lara to push the block off the other end into the dry room. I'm going to create a wall to block it off. And then in the water room, do the same thing. Create another room above this one. I'm going to select the ceiling above all the room apart from the square at the entrance and create a portal. Raise it by about that height. That's about 6 or 7 clicks. extend the wall, and then here in the middle, add a climbable pushable. So there are two types of pushable object. There's one that just pushes around, and the other you can actually climb, and these are usually blocks. Type in climb into the object menu, and it should bring up pushable object climbable 1. Place that in the middle. So when Lara jumps up, she's going to have to jump on top of the climbable block, crawl across it, and then push it from the other side over the edge. By default, a pushable can't be pushed off a ledge, but you can by changing the OCB to 1. As with many other objects, there are plenty of other OCBs that you can use to change its behavior. Once she pushes it here, we want her to push it to the edge. And so this is where we're going to put a jump switch. The jump switch needs to be high enough that she needs the block in order to reach it. So I'm actually going to place it in the room at the top. Make sure generally that you place your objects in the room where they're supposed to be. If you placed it in the room below and then raised it up into the other room, it may not actually appear properly in-game. Search in the menu for jump, and jump switch will be there. I'm going to add it to this wall. I'm going to turn it around and then pull it into the right place. That's high enough, I think. We don't want her to ever push it into the dry room, and technically she could. If she pushed the block into the middle, she could climb to the other side and then push it in. I want to change the floor height slightly on this side to make that impossible. I'm going to raise this by half a click, so 128 step height. Let's add on the other side the other puzzle piece. I'm going to raise this by half a click step height and then add another puzzle item 2. The bottom room is what's going to become the water room. And for this, we're going to create a flip map. A flip map is just a copy of this room, but you've changed a few things about it. The best thing to do is to make the room as finished as you can, including objects, textures, lighting, and then create the flipped version of it. So texture it first and add lighting that you want. And this is also where naming rooms can be quite helpful. We've got out of the habit a little bit, but let's name this room Unflipped Water. And so now we want to create the copy of the room, which will become the water. To do this, make sure you're in the room, and then here where you see Flip Map, select one of the numbers. The first flip map that you create, ironically, is 0, but it doesn't matter. You can use any number. Let's just use 0. And then if you bring down the menu, you'll notice that it's actually created another room, which is called, in this case, Unflipped Water Flipped. Click on it. You'll notice that the background goes a darker color. It's just to help you remember that you're in the flipped state of a particular room. I want to rename this as Flipped Water. And all we need to do is change it into a water room. So when you're in this flipped room, room type, water. We want to change the lighting to make it look like water. So I'm going to delete this sun bulb and then change the ambient light to, I'm going to make it a green color this time. We also need to add textures to the ceiling. So right click the portal, toggle opacity 2. And there's a little trick if you're using flipped water rooms. If you want to add textures to the portal on the top room, then you'll have to flip that room at the same time as well. But it also just works if you texture the ceiling, but double-sided. So select the water textures and make sure that double-sided and additive, so semi-transparent, is selected, and just add a few. And if you have a look from the other side, you'll see that they're double-sided. And then our water room is ready. If you want to add the reflection effect, then you'll also have to flip this room. For now, I'm just going to leave it. Using this menu, go back to the unflipped water, so you're no longer in the flipped state. Let's work out how to trigger the flip map. We know that it's when she pulls down this jump switch. So let's click on the jump switch, the square below it, and add a standard switch trigger. A jump switch by itself doesn't have reverse animations, so you don't need to click one shot. But if it was a different type of switch where you don't want her to then unflip the water, you would need to click one shot. And then on the same square, add another trigger, this time for the flip map. So trigger type, just a normal trigger. What? You need to go to flip map, reset the parameter, and then you type in here the number of the flip map room. Remember that we just used 0, and then click. I think it's nice to give the player a bit of an indication that something's changed. And to do that, we can use a sound effect, a flooding sound effect. To play a sound effect randomly, we need to use a more advanced trigger. And if you remember volume events, they're the more advanced triggers. So just go up to Edit and Volume Event Sets. Let's create a new volume event set, and let's call it Flooding. In the node editor, right-click. And how playing a sound effect works is that you can set it to play near an object. We're just going to set it to play near Lara. And so in this menu, go down to Movable State, and then Play Sound Near Movable. Double-click. The activator says movable to play the sound around. So let's select Lara. And then we want to select which sound effect to play. Luckily, we can already play the sound effects. Type in flush, and it should be TR4 water flushes. Just play it to see. Click OK. And so what we need to do is then trigger that volume event. And it's super simple. Go back onto the square with the other triggers for the jump switch. Create another trigger. Trigger type, just normal trigger. What? Volume event. Reset the parameter, and then you can select from the list you've created. So flooding. When it's just activated by a switch, on volume enter is fine, and then click OK. So everything in this room is set and ready for us to go in terms of gameplay. Let's finish off the gameplay in the other room. And so we want Lara to be able to access this puzzle piece finally. She'll have collected both of the canopic jars. And here we want to set up these puzzle holes so that it will only trigger something once both have been activated. Click one and the square underneath. Puzzle hole acts in the same way as a key. You add an object and it triggers something, so that's why it's called a key trigger. The only thing we need to change are these bits. You can have up to 5 different things that will need to be activated before it triggers something. You might remember in Tomb Raider 1 in St. Francis's Folly, she had to add lots of keys before the door opened at the bottom. And this was done using this method. For us, we're going to unselect bits 3, 4, and 5. So when she puts the object on this pedestal, it will activate bits 1 and 2, but all 5 bits have to be activated for the trigger to be done. So click OK, go to the other one, select the floor underneath, add a trigger, and in this case, uncheck bits 1 and 2. What we want is the raising block to go down. Remember from earlier, we automatically triggered it by ticking these bit boxes. And so by just adding a normal trigger for it, it actually has the opposite effect as an anti-trigger. So just click the square and the object and add a bog standard normal trigger for the raising block onto each of the puzzle hole squares. So gameplay is done for this area. Now it's time to add textures and lighting. It can be a little bit fiddly when you use sub-click geometry height to texture these little bits, so it kind of depends how much you care about getting the texturing perfect. I've tried a little bit to make it look okay, but of course it could be better. And don't forget, with the raising block, when it gets lowered, the square underneath it, we need to make it transparent, otherwise the texture on the floor will fight with the texture on top of the raising block. I added another smashable vase in the corner with a heavy trigger for some revolver ammo, a couple of flame emitters by the doors, and a couple of columns underneath these ledges. So what did we do in this lesson? We learned how to use volume triggers, teeth spikes, pad triggers, sub-click geometry, climbable pushables, Flipmaps, puzzle holes, toggle opacity 1, and split triggers, where you need more than one object in order to trigger something. Still to come, we get to grips with Lua scripting, add some sound effects and bump maps and some other visual effects like distance fog, and then Lara gets to escape the tomb finally, but there's one last challenge in her way.